Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to today's session on Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop. My name is Bill Kastner, and I am an Azure-focused solutions expert, I guess, with ProServeIT. From an agenda perspective, we're going to walk through a bit of an introduction, which obviously I'm going to muck up. We're going to talk about benefits of Windows Virtual Desktop. We're going to talk about securing Windows Virtual Desktop, Windows Desktop deployment, licensing, and then wrap up with some next steps. So when we talk to customers about desktop virtualization, there are a number of customer business use cases that come to mind as good candidates. If you do find yourself in a organization that has security or regulatory requirements, WVD or Windows Virtual Desktop allows you to provide a secure desktop scenario that can often meet those regulatory requirements. If you deal with an elastic workforce where you have users that need to be onboarded and offboarded, or a fluid group of users, or whether you grow through M&A or merger and acquisition type activities, being able to provision a virtual desktop allows users to get up and operational in a much more timely fashion than with the traditional provisioning process. If your organization supports BYOD or bring your own device or mobile users, have call centers or branch office workers, WVD again can be a great fit, as it can for those organizations that have specialized workloads. So maybe those who have CAD CAM type applications that might require specific hardware like high-end GPUs and such, or legacy application requirements or dev test. All of these we've found can be great candidates for Windows Virtual Desktop. So when we talk about the value that Windows Virtual Desktop brings, there's a couple key things worth noting. So first, this is the only multi-session Windows 10 desktop experience available. So historically, we've either had multi-session server-based desktop experiences, things like remote desktop services or terminal services, or we've looked to third-party solutions like Citrix and VMware for Windows 10 desktop experiences, but typically that's built on a one-to-one scenario. WVD allows us to build that multi-session Windows 10 experience, so everybody gets that feature-rich capabilities that Windows 10 brings to the table, but allows us to stack multiple users on an individual VM, so we could take advantage of scaling and make sure that we're getting good utilization on the infrastructure. In addition, we also support single-session Windows 10 and Windows 7 desktops as well. So Windows 7 is sort of an interesting one because we do see organizations that still face challenges with retiring Windows 7 from their environment. Some organizations are still dealing with legacy applications that either don't work right in Windows 10 or aren't fully supported. So for organizations that are facing those types of challenges, deploying Windows Virtual Desktop or WVD to support those Windows 7 applications can get them off of the traditional desktops and allow organizations to start their Windows 10 rollout. One thing worth noting is while Windows 7 has reached end of life in the standard marketplace, by deploying Windows 7 inside of Azure, you're actually able to take advantage of the extended security updates that Microsoft provides. And this provides organizations with an additional 3 years of security updates to better protect those legacy operating systems. In addition, Windows Virtual Desktop also provides optimizations for Microsoft 365. And this is really important. So for those organizations that might have worked with virtual desktops in the past, one of the biggest challenges we've often seen is with applications like Office and OneDrive. Outlook and OneDrive. So Outlook specifically, if you have your Exchange server side by side with your client, running in non-cache mode is typically not a huge issue. When you move from folder to folder and message to message, your responsiveness is really quick. When you move to Office 365, because it is a cloud experience, those message to message and folder to folder moves can often introduce 1, 2, 3 second delays every time. And if you're sifting through your mailbox trying to find something and sort of checking message by message, those types of delays can introduce some significant delay and impact overall end user experience. Because Windows Virtual Desktop allows us to actually leverage profile containers to store user data in an external VHD file, we're able to create that OST file and have it locally available regardless of which desktop that user logs into. This is an important improvement over what we've seen in the past, where we've had organizations that rely on things like folder redirection or network attached drives to store OST files to try to get around that limitation. The challenge is that's not really a fully supported solution by Microsoft, and there have been situations where that has actually caused data corruption. And so we try to stay away from redirection and map drives where possible. Being able to store user profile information in a standalone VHD where it's attached as part of the login experience, it provides that seamless, rich experience and is immediately available, provides a significantly better end user experience for users. And this allows us to, again, maintain that non-persistent desktop where it doesn't matter which desktop a user connects to, all of their information is stored in that standalone file that gets attached as part of the login for them. Organizations that have deployed Windows Server desktops or remote desktop services, RDS, there's actually a migration path available for you as well. So if your RDS environment is running 2012 R2 or newer, you can actually migrate that infrastructure as is into Azure, which might raise the question why you would want to do that. So some of the key reasons are around improved security and just reducing the burden on IT. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into this further into the slides, but things like brokering services and gateways and such that you have in place today, that you typically need to manage to provide a secure desktop connection. All these are offloaded to Microsoft in a WVD experience. The other key benefit is with traditional RDS, you need to typically open port 3389 to publish remote desktop services out to the internet. And this can be a common vector for attack, with many organizations facing challenges with denial of service attacks around that port. With Azure's WVD solution, there are no externally published ports. We actually leverage what's called a reverse connect model, where users authenticate into Azure and then are presented back with their specific desktop and applications. So this can provide a much more secure experience. On the topic of security, so there's a number of different elements that many organizations have already deployed that you can leverage as part of WVD. If you're leveraging multi-factor authentication or conditional access, these same rule sets can be applied to WVD desktop experiences. If you're leveraging Microsoft's endpoint protection, again, you can leverage that here for WVD. It is important to note that while this is a multi-session desktop experience, at the end of the day, it's still a traditional Windows 10 desktop. We still need to worry about patching. We still need to worry about antivirus. So being able to leverage the tool sets that we already have in place today can be beneficial, both to help ensure that we secure the environment and that we're not introducing new procedures just to manage a standalone instance. From a networking perspective, as mentioned, we leverage that reverse connect model where we don't need to publish any external ports. And that can be a significant improvement from a security standpoint. When we look at infrastructure, we're able to leverage secure hardware as well as all the compliance certifications that Microsoft has maintained. So Microsoft's Azure data centers are compliant with most of your major certification standards, from ISO through HIPAA, through PIPA, through all the other various certification requirements that many organizations face. The fact that Microsoft already maintains these certification standards makes it much easier for organizations to adopt who are looking to offload some of their infrastructure into Azure. Lastly, from a data perspective, we're able to take advantage of data access policies and encryption, where we can encrypt both data in transit and at rest to help improve our overall security. For those organizations that already have a SIM or are looking to deploy one like Azure Sentinel, all of these security endpoints can have their data aggregated. For those not familiar with the concept of a SIM, it's basically a single pane of glass. It's a data aggregator. So it allows you to collect all of the various logs and data entries, both from on-premise and cloud security products, into that single pane of glass to allow you as an administrator easy access and a quick view into the overall environment. All of these Microsoft Azure solutions that wrap around WVD will natively integrate both with third-party as well as Microsoft's native Sentinel-based solution. When we look at management with traditional VDI solutions, there are a number of components that come into play. We have user entitlement and image management. We have brokering services and gateways. We have licensing, maintenance, as well as the underlying infrastructure like network servers and storage that need to be managed. As mentioned, when we look at Windows Virtual Desktop, a number of these underlying elements are now managed by Microsoft. So you as an administrator still need to worry about user entitlement and image management, and the rest of it supported by Microsoft at no additional cost. This is important because it helps reduce the overall burden on IT to support the infrastructure, but it also allows you to manage the elements of WVD that make sense and actually add value to the business. Being able to assign users to desktops and applications or manage those individual desktops and the applications associated are things that are providing clear value to the business, whereas the rest of the infrastructure is really just there to support that. So being able to offload that to Microsoft can reduce the effort that's required to support this type of a WVD solution. When we look at deployment options for Windows Virtual Desktop, there are a couple things to note. So from a compute perspective, any of you who might have deployed any infrastructure in Azure are familiar with the idea that Microsoft introduces a number of virtual machine families. And within them, we have a number of different VM types that we can deploy with varying CPU, memory, and storage requirements. WVD is built on the same architecture, and so any of those hardware models that we have available to us for servers in Azure, we can also leverage for virtual desktops. This gives us a great degree of flexibility in the desktops that we deploy. So if we protect, in an example, have applications that are maybe very CPU intensive, but not overly dependent on memory, we can build models of virtual machines that have more CPU cores than normal, while not increasing our overall memory on the virtual machines. This flexibility is really important within Azure because Azure is built around a pay-as-you-go or a pay-per-minute model, where every CPU core, every gig of memory, every gig of storage that you use, there's a cost associated. So being able to build custom machines to meet your specific requirements is beneficial. We have the ability to choose to either lift and shift an existing gold image or build net new greenfield environments for VDI. So if you already have a Windows 10 gold image that has all of your corporate applications on it, we can import that into Azure and build our WVD environment leveraging that, which can significantly reduce the time to deploy. Other organizations that maybe want to take this as an opportunity to create a brand new environment can leverage a Microsoft Gallery image of Windows 10, possibly even with the Office Pro Plus bits installed, to allow them to start fresh with WVD and build it as they require. We focus a lot on pooled virtual machines where we have the ability to store multiple users on a given virtual machine, but WVD does also support personal machines for those scenarios where we require that one-to-one relationship between desktops and users. When we look at user profiles, so as mentioned, we're able to take advantage of faster logins and application launch times with FS Logics. So FS Logics is an acquisition that Microsoft made a number of years ago. It's the FS Logics technology that allows us to actually store user profile information in that standalone VHD. As mentioned, this makes things far more seamless for the end user. It allows us to ensure that there's no contamination of the image with user data that might sometimes happen. All of that user profile information is stored in a standalone VHD file. So regardless of which desktop a user logs into, all of their most recent information is immediately accessible. And this just gets attached as part of the login process. Those VHD files can be stored in a number of different locations, whether it's Azure files, NetApp files, or file servers or file server clusters. When we look at applications, there's a couple different ways in which we can tackle applications inside a Windows Virtual Desktop. The more traditional approach is what we would call an overloading of a VM. So this again would be where you have a single gold image, you have all the applications required for multiple departments contained within that image, and then through app masking, which is another element of that FS Logic acquisition, we're able to take advantage of app masking to hide the applications that aren't relevant to a user. So rather than building up multiple gold image for different departments, or potentially having users seeing applications that aren't applicable or associated to them, through app masking, we can tailor that end user experience to only show users the applications that they're entitled for and that they actually require. This can be beneficial in that it helps reduce clutter and confusion for users, as well as helps keep us on track from a licensing perspective, as we're only showing applications to the users who are truly licensed for them. So Microsoft first released Windows Virtual Desktop in September of 2019, and they've worked over the last 16 months or 17 months or so to introduce a number of changes to Windows Virtual Desktop to improve the overall experience. From a Microsoft Teams perspective, Microsoft has worked on developing audio-video redirection. And this is really important for those organizations that have tried to do any sort of audio-video conferencing in a VDI experience before. So typically with traditional VDI, trying to do audio or video inside of that virtual desktop introduces a lot of latency and a negative end user experience. That multiple hops from the physical endpoint to the virtual endpoint to the cloud out to the remote endpoint, that typically introduces latency, and we see degradation of both that audio and video stream. With Microsoft's Teams AV redirection, we're actually able to take that virtual desktop out of the picture, redirect that audio video request down to the actual endpoint, and then establish a pure end-to-end connection. This cuts out a number of hops that are typically involved in that scenario and provides a near parity experience with a traditional Teams desktop installation. It is important to note that this is a Microsoft-only solution. So if you are leveraging a third-party audio video conferencing solution, something like WebEx or GoToMeeting or any of the other solutions, these optimizations will not be taken advantage of. This is only possible in this scenario because Microsoft owns the stack from the desktop through the application itself, and the teams were able to work in conjunction to provide this benefit. When we look at OneDrive, there's a couple things worth noting. So we do have co-authoring and collaboration capabilities. We do have the ability to leverage that OneDrive sync in non-persistent desktop environments. So again, because we have that standalone VHD file that contains our Outlook OST file and OneDrive cached information, we can cache the data that's critical to users to allow them to be productive without having to worry about, again, that cluttering that actual virtual desktop itself. We can still take advantage of files on demand capabilities, as well as auto-populate user profile folders. From an Outlook perspective, we're able to prioritize the syncing of inbox before the calendar. And this is really important when first launching Outlook for the first time. Once you have your Outlook profile cached, you're no longer really worried because all of that data, or the vast majority of the data the user is going to access, is already available in that OST file. But when a user is first logging into a virtual desktop for the first time, being able to prioritize different types of information to get them productive in a more timely fashion is key. So being able to prioritize your inbox over your calendar, again, helps ensure that users are able to get productive that much faster. We also have the ability to reduce calendar sync windows. So rather, where we might be syncing 6 months of mail items, for instance, maybe we only want to sync 3 months of calendar items because we know it's far less likely that users are going to go back in time to visit previous meetings, unlike they would for their mailbox itself. We also have the ability to reduce the number of folders that are synced by default. Again, all designed to help ensure that users get productive that much faster. So maybe we prioritize the inbox and sent items just to ensure that users are able to get productive and start operating in a more timely fashion. And then we have the ability to come back over time and start to add some of those other subfolders in from a syncing perspective. Windows Desktop Search is now also on a per user basis, so it allows us to customize or ensure that the results that are identified through that search are specific to that user itself. One of the key things WVD brings to the table is what's called auto scaling. And this is the ability to start and stop VMs based off of business hours to reduce overall cost. So as I mentioned previously, with Windows Virtual Desktop, with Azure, everything is baked around per minute billing. So as long as a virtual machine is running, you're paying for the CPU cycles, the memory, and the storage associated with a virtual machine. By identifying what your peak business hours are, traditionally Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, for example, we can ensure that virtual machines will spin up at 8:30 in the morning, so those desktops are ready as users log in at 9 o'clock, so we don't end up in a boot storm scenario. We can ensure there's sufficient desktops with sufficient resources for users to be able to log in and be productive immediately. Once that business day has ended at 5 o'clock, we can then pick a time at say 5:30 or 6 where we might still have stragglers across multiple different desktops. We have the ability to drain those users from all the different desktops and consolidate them down to a single desktop or two in the, depending on the scenario, and then start to shut the other VMs down. This allows us to significantly reduce overall costs compared to running all these virtual machines 24/7. When we look at Azure costing, it's typically baked around 730 hours of consumption a month. Versus if you're a traditional business and you're Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, many of these VMs we can often get down to 220-ish hours a month, and that can provide some pretty significant savings. We are also able to take advantage of things like service tags and URL security. So we can meet firewall connection requirements with defined service tags, and there is a software developer kit for Linux thin clients, which does raise an interesting point and one that we haven't really addressed. So while Windows Virtual Desktop is providing a Windows 10 desktop experience, it is important to note that there are a wide range of client types that are supported. So with WVD, we have the ability to publish both full desktops as well as individual applications. There's a rich client and an HTML client available for WVD. The rich client is available on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android devices. But because we have that HTML5 based client, we're also able to support Linux. This gives us a broad range of client types that we can support. Again, either with full desktop experiences or individual applications based off that specific user need. Now let's talk about licensing. So I'm going to start on the right here on the server side, just because it is sort of a simpler window to talk through. So if you again have if you have remote desktop services and have software assurance on the RDS CALs, you already have all the licensing required to enable WVD for server-based workloads. We still need to worry about consumption for the virtual machines themselves, but from a licensing perspective, you are entirely covered. If we look at the client side for Windows 10, there are a number of licenses that are eligible for WVD. If you were a Microsoft 365 customer, leveraging either the E3 or E5 license SKUs or the business SKUs or the F3 SKU, then you already have all the licenses required. It is important to note that Microsoft has made some recent changes to their licensing nomenclature, where we used to see Office 365, some of those licenses have been rebranded as Microsoft 365 licenses. So it's important to ensure that that you do have a license that gives you entitlement to Office 365, the Enterprise and Mobility Suite or EMS, and Windows 10. It's those Microsoft 365 licenses that give you the entitlement, because what we're really looking for here is that Windows 10 license subscription. If you are an Office 365 customer, or even if you're not but want to leverage WVD, you can choose just to buy into the Windows 10 Enterprise E3 or E5 SKUs. It is important to note that these are subscription-based licenses. If you have Windows 10 licensing on-prem, even with software assurance, that does not give you the license entitlement you need for WVD. You do need to buy into that subscription-based licensing model that Microsoft provides for Office 365, Windows 10, and EMS. As noted at the bottom, there's a couple considerations from a costing perspective. First, you are only paying for the virtual machine storage and networking that are consumed as users are using the service. And this goes back to that auto start capability or auto scaling capability that we spoke about earlier. Because we're only paying for these virtual machines while they're running, it's important to be able to shut these machines down when they're not actively in use. The second note makes reference to the fact that these virtual desktop VMs are charged at Linux compute rates, and this is important as well. As many of you might be aware, when you spin up a server-based VM in Azure, that permanent billing by default also includes a licensing component. So it includes your Windows Server and or SQL licensing components. Because here in WVD, you are paying for the licensing through that Windows 10 Enterprise SKU or the Microsoft 365 SKU, the virtual machines as they're spun up are based off of Linux only, which means you're only paying for compute, memory, and storage. There's no licensing cost involved. Lastly, it's worth noting that for those of you who might be familiar with the concept of reserved instances, these can be applied to Windows Virtual Desktop as well. Essentially, reserved instances are when you pre-commit to either a 1 or a 3-year term because this infrastructure is going to be running for an extended period. You do have the ability to continue to pay on a month-by-month basis, which is something that was a challenge for customers in the past. But so you can pre-commit to that 3-year term or 1-year term, take advantage of the significant savings that introduces, but still continue to pay on a month-by-month basis. So with that snapshot, I'm going to mention, there's a lot of elements to Windows Virtual Desktop that we really weren't able to cover within this short window. 30 minutes sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot of time to dig in deep to a number of these different topics. So there's a couple things I'd like to highlight. First, if Windows Virtual Desktop sounds like it might be of interest to you, ProServeIT does have a proof of concept offer in the market that we'd be happy to talk to you about. With this proof of concept, we're able to spin up a WVD environment, validate that end user experience, and give you a level of comfort with what WVD can bring to the business. We do typically layer on the Nerdio manager for WVD as it introduces a number of features and functions that just aren't natively available inside of WVD itself. But this proof of concept is really important to understand how WVD is going to work inside of your environment. As I did note earlier, when you deploy WVD, which is an Azure-only solution, You absolutely can leave your server environment on premise. We've seen a number of customers, especially in this pandemic scenario that we've found ourselves in, that are looking at an alternative means to point-to-site VPNs to provide a secure desktop experience to their users. And so WVD fits that niche very well. But it is important to test inside of your specific environment, because while it is possible to leave your server environment on premise, if you have a server client-based application where there's sensitivity to latency between the client and server, it's important to actually test what that experience is like in your specific environment, right? Understanding what your bandwidth is, what the resources for your applications as such that are available, and testing that out to ensure that the end user experience is going to be positive. So proof of concept is really critical to actually testing this out and giving you the confidence that the experience is going to be what your users expect. If this proof of concept sounds like it's something you might be interested in, or if you just want to dig in deeper into Windows Virtual Desktop and get a better understanding of either the solution or how it might fit inside your organization, or maybe you want a demo of Windows Virtual Desktop, you can reach out to us at cloud@ProServeIT.com and be happy to schedule some time to talk to you. The other thing I will note is we are running a WVD in a day workshop. I believe we have one scheduled for the end of February and one for early March. You should see a link in the chat for this session as we talk right now. There will be a link to the registration page. This is a full day on Windows Virtual Desktop. It includes several hours of discussion and dialogue over what the WVD solution looks like and all the nuances associated, as well as several hours of hands-on labs where you can actually build out Windows Virtual Desktop and test the overall experience yourself. If WVD sounds like it's something that might be of value, but you are, again, more of a hands-on person or just want to dig in deep into what WVD can bring to your organization, I highly encourage you to look into that full day webinar, as there's a wealth of information there for you. With that, I want to say thank you very much for spending the time with us on this WVD session and with us for the day as a whole. Hopefully you found some informative information and this has provided some great value for you to your business. On a parting note, like I said, if you do have any questions or want any follow-up, you can reach out to us at cloud@ProServeIT.com. Alternatively, if you do post any questions in the chat, because of the tight window, we're not really able to answer questions live as it stands right now. But if you do post your questions in the chat, we are going to record those. We will provide answers. We'll probably need a day or two to do that, but we will send an email out to all the participants of this session with both the questions and answers. So if you do see a question that's already in chat that you are wondering about as well, we're going to make sure that everybody gets to see both the questions and the answers, and hopefully that clears up some outstanding questions you guys may have. And with that, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us, and I wish you all a great rest of the day. Thank you.